Suicide was something that happened to other people until 2013 when my 82-year-old dad, Alan, took his own life. His physical and mental well-being had declined and he was awaiting an official Parkinson's diagnosis. I'd become increasingly worried about his behaviour and loss of interest in things he once enjoyed but had no idea the outcome would be suicide. Looking back though, there were definitely signs and red flags. He said things like, "That's the last time I'm cutting the grass," as if he was checking out and putting things in order. He became increasingly agitated, erratic and irrational in the things he said. I took him to see his GP just a few days before he died. He was put on antidepressants, but I think he'd already made his mind up. He wasn't the type to open up about how he was feeling and said he didn't want to be a burden. Days before his death, he suggested he'd been depressed since the death of my mum, his wife, from hereditary bowel cancer in 1980 when I was 4 and my sister was 6, leaving him to bring us up alone. As the only parent I'd ever really known, this somehow heightened the sense of loss I felt and still feel. My dad must have known I would find him at his home when I came to visit the day he died. People said this was selfish, but I don't see it that way. That day is etched on my memory forever. It was a July day and we were in the middle of a heat wave. Hot weather has been emotionally and physically activating for me ever since, which I think is a post-traumatic response. After the paramedics and police had gone, I was left to deal with the aftermath, feeling bewildered, guilty, alone and heartbroken without much in the way of support. At the funeral, people asked, "Why did he kill himself?" and I didn't know what to say. I think he knew his quality of life was not going to improve and probably felt quite alone. Suicide thoughts and behaviours in older people is something we don't really talk about enough, but it affects so many people. The night he died, I started Googling the unknown subject of suicide for hours, why people do it and what support there is for bereaved people. I found a charity called Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide, or SOBS, who offer peer support groups across the UK. Peer support was something I was previously unaware of, but I've grown to think of as gold dust and a personal lifeline for me. I realised firsthand that suicide bereavement can be complex and there's still a lot of stigma attached, but sharing the experience is so important. When a new group opened in my area, I went along the very next month, crying all the way there, but when I arrived I felt like I'd come home and haven't stopped going since. There were no funny looks or judgments. People had different experiences of suicide bereavement, but there was a commonality. We laughed, we cried, but it was all somehow okay and felt comfortable. I later became a group co-facilitator. I learn something new every month and feel it's a two-way street, supporting others in their bereavement whilst experiencing healing for myself. I have met so many amazing people who get up every morning despite losing children, parents, siblings and other loved ones to suicide. I find them so inspiring and often wonder how they keep going. People bereaved by suicide are at a greater risk of having suicide thoughts themselves, and I can see why. I have gone on to sit on the board of trustees with the charity and also a founding member of the People with Lived Experience of Suicide Bureau with Hampshire County Council Public Health and support public health with suicide prevention projects. Suicide first aid and intervention is something I'm passionate about also, and have undertaken many interventions over the years, whether the recipient likes it or not. Being bereaved by suicide has given me a heightened sense of awareness of people in distress, and I find it hard to walk on by. I always say I'll never like what my dad did, but I feel I understand it more now. He was more like a friend than a dad. He was quite a character, a terminal heckler, ballroom dancer, famous for his hats and driving old bangers. He was a carpenter by trade but could turn his hand to anything practical. My grief and trauma has eased over time, but sometimes it hits me like a thunderbolt. I can't believe it happened and that I'll never see him again. I think that we all have a responsibility to notice changes in people's behaviour and act on them, whether in a domestic, community or work setting, to reduce the potential risk of suicide and to make lives better. We should think of it as caring for our fellow human during the tough times that sadly all of us experience through life. Having suicide feelings is a natural response to difficult situations, and we should all work towards normalising conversations about them. I've had those feelings and perhaps you have too. Not everyone considering suicide is going to open up about how they are feeling, which was certainly the case with my dad. But let's ask those difficult questions. It's not enough to just be kind. There are people out there and organisations who want to help. Would you know what to do?